First of all, welcome to our workshop in collaboration with the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, or ASAP. We're really excited to have our speakers here today and all of you here to participate. And today we're going to explore ASAP's Living Guide to the Principles of Climate Change Adaptation, and specifically how it can be a tool to you all as emerging adaptation professionals. Everyone should be pretty comfortable with using Zoom at this point. However, before we get started, I have a few reminders. First, during the presentations from our speakers, please make sure to keep yourself on mute so we don't have any background noise. And if something particularly resonates with you, or if you have a question for our speakers during the call, feel free to send those in the chat box during the session, and I'll help moderate. We'll also have 2 breakout sessions today, where you'll be actively participating with a small group, as well as a wrap-up section at the very end. So you'll definitely have plenty of chances to unmute yourself and participate when we aren't having presentations from our speakers. And like all of our trainings, this workshop will be recorded and made available by the end of the week in our training archive. So before we get started, I'd also like to briefly introduce our speakers for today. So first we have Rachel Jacobson, who joins us as the Deputy Director of ASAP. She leads the development, implementation, and continuous improvement of ASAP's programs to promote peer learning, advance effective adaptation practice, and build cohesion across the field of climate change adaptation. Previously, Rachel was a contractor and a fellow at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, where she implemented 2 strategic initiatives, Resilience AmeriCorps and the Department of Commerce Natural Capital Business Roundtables. Rachel earned her BA, MPP, and MS degrees from the University of Michigan and holds a certificate in environmental law and regulation from the University of Washington. She hails from Michigan, lives in Syracuse, New York, and believes the fresh coast is the best coast. We are also joined by Katie Spitalieri. She's a senior associate at the Georgetown Climate Center, where she provides legal and policy analysis on adaptation projects at the state, federal, and local levels. Her work focuses on adaptation in the coastal sector, including evaluating land use and other tools and strategies such as managed retreat to adapt to rising seas and flooding. Prior to joining the Climate Center, Katie worked for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and state environmental agencies in Maryland and North Carolina. Katie holds a JD from Cleveland Marshall College of Law, and she also received 2 degrees from the University of Virginia in history and an interdisciplinary environmental thought and practice program. Katie is currently pursuing her Master's of Law in Environmental and Energy Law from Georgetown University Law Center. And last but not least, we also have Karen Rogers with us today. She's the Interim Director and Research Scientist at the National Environmental Modeling and Analysis Center, or NEMAC, located at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. Her work involves both day-to-day operations, as well as working with federal, local, and state partners to effectively deliver and communicate their science for more informed decision-making. She also co-leads the NEMAC Student Intern Program. Previously, she worked as a research coordinator at the University of Georgia Department of Crop and Soil Sciences, researching issues related to water quality and non-point source pollution. Karen received her MS in geology with a concentration in fluvial geomorphology from the University of Georgia, and her bachelor's degree in geology from Union College. So a huge warm welcome to our speakers, and I'll pass it over to Rachel to give you more of an introduction and framing for today's session.
Thanks so much, Kaylee. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited, especially to be here with Karen and Katie, 2 really outstanding ASAP members. And I really hope that this will be an opportunity for you all to learn more about ASAP's Living Guide, more about what quality climate adaptation practice can look like in multiple different contexts, and of course, help you get more connected to the adaptation professional community as you all kind of near the end of your fellowship year and are thinking about next steps. Next slide, please. And just to give you a little guide to what we're going to cover today, I'll give an overview of ASAP, and as Kaylee said, a little frame up for our workshop together. Then we're going to have 2 breakout sessions. The first one will be about just getting to know one another and the reasons for being here. And ASAP takes breakouts really seriously, or takes introductions really seriously. So this breakout session is just as important as the working one. Then we will have what I am positive will be a set of really fabulous presentations from Katie and Karen about how they're applying principles from the Living Guide into their own work as adaptation professionals. Then we'll have our second breakout session, which is all about giving fellows an opportunity to really assess their own adaptation practice through the lens of the Living Guide. And then we'll just wrap up at the end with some reflections, thinking about next steps for bringing what we all learned today back to our own work. And we'll be together for an hour and a half. So until 12 Pacific time, do I have that right? 12 Pacific time and 3 Eastern time. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm gonna first just give some background on ASAP, how we function, and how the Living Guide fits into that. So the first thing to know is that at ASAP, it's all about the people. And this is, this slide is just a few of the faces of the many 500 plus ASAP members who are working together and inspiring one another every day to do adaptation work on the ground. And at ASAP, it's not about what job you have, or even if you have a traditional job, it's really about how you're approaching the work. And ASAP members are really approaching climate work through a commitment to pragmatically and systemically face the realities of climate change. And through relationships with one another, kind of building this sense of optimism and hope that's really required to carry us through the climate crisis. Next slide. The strength of our network here at ASAP is really in its sectoral and regional diversity, which you can see represented here. We have about a quarter of our members in each of 4 sectors: academic, private, government, and nonprofit. And we're all learning together and sharing together every day from across those contexts. And this is actually a pretty old map, but I think it's still mostly representative of our geography, which is, spread across the entire US, a little bit in Canada, as well as 6 other countries. And it includes we have members in 48 states. And we do have, some pockets of places that are more dense with members, such as the Bay Area and DC, but we really do have members in a ton of different geographies. And, what that means is that you can find inspiration, professional connection, and camaraderie within ASAP, no matter where you're working or what you're working on. Next slide. So the adaptation field, and we'll talk about what that means in just a second, is growing really by leaps and bounds every year. And there's a ton of incredible organizations doing this work. Of course, Karen and Katie are representing 2 of them. And there are many more. And so at ASAP, we're not here to reinvent the wheel, but rather operate as an intermediary organization to bring together many disparate groups and start to unite them around shared principles, shared practices, shared goals. And while we are structured like a professional association with a membership fee and things like that, we mostly operate as a social impact network. And that means that everything we do is with, by, and for our members, and functions on values like reciprocity, open access, having something for every member, and most importantly, trust. And we see building trust as really critical to support collaboration, so that we can make more and better change together. Next slide. So at ASAP, we are working to build the capacity of individual adaptation professionals and capacities in the adaptation field through 4 program areas: adaptation careers, which is all about helping members excel in their current jobs and find new jobs; ASAP Connects, which is all about providing the infrastructure for members to connect with infrastructure and opportunities for members to connect with one another, both in person and virtually, obviously these days a little bit more virtually. Adaptation Voices. This is about sharing and celebrating member stories and accomplishments and serving as a voice for the adaptation field. And finally, ASAP Serves, which is where folks give back to the network through a myriad of opportunities to collaborate and share their own resources. Next slide. So just really briefly, in the ASAP Connects program, we have a variety of member groups, and you can see a few of them listed here. They meet, most of them meet approximately monthly, and folks come together through these topical groups virtually to do peer learning and take action. And we have a couple of ASAP members on the call today. I'll just call out, Miles Gordon, for example, is a member of our policy and practice group, and Miles is one of our member leaders in that group, working on our policy message campaign, for example. And we have many other groups that you can see listed here, as well as some others that aren't even on here, where folks come together around different topics. Next slide. And then we have Adaptation Voices. Again, this is where we lift up member stories, and we have 3 primary publications. We have a monthly newsletter, which is all about kind of showcasing innovation and developments in the adaptation field. We publish a weekly jobs and opportunities email, which is all about getting the word out there about new and open opportunities in the adaptation field across all sectors. And then bi-monthly, we publish our network news, which is all about showcasing what's happening in our network and how to plug in. Next slide. With adaptation careers, I want to highlight one particular program inside that program area, which is our mentorship program. And we've had a lot of past and present CivicSpark fellows as part of that program. The mentorship program pairs emerging adaptation professionals with accomplished members of the ASAP network to do one-on-one mentoring, as well as cohort-wide opportunities to connect over the course of 9 months. And we're going to have our next recruitment period for that program in the fall. And so that next cohort will start in January of 2021. So a really good alignment with folks kind of transitioning out of CivicSpark and then kind of looking for support in their next steps. So definitely consider that. Next slide. And when we connect and support adaptation professionals in all of the ways that I just described, that's really what makes it possible for us to all work together to advance the adaptation field. And I promised that I would talk about what an adaptation field is. So what is a field, and why does it matter if we have one or not? So climate adaptation work is happening in so many places by so many dedicated people with a variety of professional identities. And you can see just a sampling of those here on the slide. And we believe that all of those are incredibly important, and we're dedicated to bringing them together to form a cohesive whole. And so that is the field. It's a community of organizations and individuals working together to solve a common set of problems and develop a common body of theory and knowledge. But it also, the people who are engaged in that, are coming from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different places, and a lot of different areas of professional practice. And that really is what our network is really well positioned to do, is to build that field. And the field is evolving before our eyes, and we're tracking that evolution. So we ask folks every year on our member survey to tell us where they think the field is. And field evolution science, which is apparently a thing, tells us that there are 5 stages in field evolution, for all the way from framing to mainstreaming. And you can see these charts that we're using to kind of track that data and see how our network is perceiving the way that the field is evolving. And we are, taking these incremental steps towards having a more unified and mainstream field. And we hope and believe that the things that we do together as a network are helping us get there. Next slide. So as I shared before, ASAP operates as a hybrid kind of professional association and social impact network. And we've been evolving as a network for over a decade. And each year, as we strengthen that trust and relationships between members, we're able to more strongly influence our own work and the direction of the field. And so this graphic just shows different modes of network function and how they build on one another. And ASAP is really doing all three of these functions, connectivity, alignment, and production. And we're always trying to strengthen our network so that we can achieve more together. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because I think it's important context to understand why we developed the Living Guide and what we're hoping to do with it. So next slide. So by functioning as a network, we're working to advance the field, and the Living Guide is one of the outcomes of that, as are several additional initiatives that ASAP members have undertaken together. And you'll see, again, as I mentioned, Miles working on our policy message campaign. You can see a snippet of that here. So we have our Code of Ethics, the criteria for our Regional Adaptation Leadership Award, our Knowledge and Competencies Framework for adaptation professionals, our Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Statement. All of these things are products that the ASAP network members have completed together. And the Living Guide is one of those as well. I didn't put it on the slide because we're gonna get to that a little bit later, but I'll leave you with this final message before we transition to our breakouts, which is that by being part of this workshop, you are really part of that process with us, whether you're currently an ASAP member or not. And of course, we hope you'll become one if you're not, but even just by being here today, you're contributing to that. So thank you, and I'm really excited to dive in. And with that, I will turn it back over to Keely to get us into our breakouts. So I just wanted to orient folks to the Living Guide. I know you all explored it prior to coming here. Thank you so much for engaging in that pre-work. It really allows us to kind of dig in as we're here together today. And I just want to give a little bit of context on the sort of the living portion of the Living Guide, which is that, what we did to create this was basically synthesize all of the field spanning white and gray literature that articulated principles of good adaptation practice, and we put them in this guide. And we did a series of focus groups with ASAP members to refine what we had articulated. We just recently did an update with some folks from Antioch University of New England, and then we continue to update it when we receive insight from ASAP members and other folks. And we even use workshops like this as an opportunity to really refine what we're saying in the guide. And so it really is a process, and it really is living. And I think it also is important to articulate a couple of things that the Living Guide is not. So it's not a how-to guide. There are a lot of how-to guides out there on adaptation, and it's not an adaptation process document. It's not like, do these steps, follow this process, and you will get to good adaptation work. Because it's meant to be integrated into any professional context, the principles are really designed to be broad and to be sort of like not time specific or process specific. So, and what they are designed to do is really to articulate a set of principles that basically, in short, we can all agree on, but then knowing that they're constantly being updated and evolving. With that bit of framing, I would love to hear from all of you what principles in the guide resonated the most with you. And so Kaylee's going to launch a little Zoom poll on that. And I think there's two questions, right, Kaylee?
Yeah, so it's a two-parter because we were limited to 10 options per question. Just make sure you scroll down. You should be able to see both at the same time. And you should have multiple choice selection option, so you can choose as many as applicable to you.
Yeah, so again, just which of these principles resonated most with you? And we'll take another 20 seconds on this. All right, we ready?
See, we've got about 13 more people who haven't voted, so get your last hit submit as soon as you can. And I'll go ahead and end it in just a second. Okay, you should be
Awesome.
able to see the results now.
Yeah, this looks great. Thank you. So wow, I can even see it on my phone. This is great. So thinking systems. Not surprising. We hear that in so many contexts, that thinking systems is consistently one of the top principles that's resonating with folks. Achieving just and equitable outcomes. I'll just note that we're constantly updating our own understanding as ASAP staff, as an ASAP network, of what just and equitable outcomes even means. And so it's awesome that that's resonating with folks, because you can help us do that work by engaging with the network. Improving connection to improve resilience. I love this principle because it's so broad and yet so meaningful in so many different contexts. And finally, collaboration. If there's one way that I would characterize what we're trying to promote in ASAP, it's definitely more collaboration. So thank you so much for engaging with the guide, especially for putting in that time before getting here, and for sharing your thoughts with us just now. It's a great segue into our presenters, who will share in their own way which principles resonate most with them and their work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie, who is going to provide the first of 2 ASAP member presentations.
Okay, so are you all seeing my screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Now let's see if the button works. All right. So thanks to ASAP and CivicSpark for the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our work at the Georgetown Climate Center and helping states and communities become more resilient to impacts from climate change on the coast. So sea level rise, flooding, erosion, but also other coastal hazards from extreme storms and other weather events. So really quick, the Georgetown Climate Center, we're a nonprofit affiliated with Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. We have 2 branches under our center, mitigation to help reduce emissions in the transportation and energy sectors, and also the team that I work on, adaptation, where we do a myriad of things to help states and communities prepare for different impacts from climate change. One of the main things we do to serve as this resource is we curate and prepare and maintain a variety of different online resources, which may be useful to you all also as you go forward in your careers. The 3 main resources that we have, the first you see at the top of the screen is the Adaptation Clearinghouse, available at adaptationclearinghouse.org, which is a one-stop shop for literally thousands of adaptation resources, from laws and policies to plans or case study examples of jurisdictions, how they have done something. And so if you're searching for a subject across different sectors or across different levels of government, this is a great place to start. We also maintain in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen what's called our State Progress Checker, which is available on our main website, georgetownclimate.org, which basically gives a snapshot of how states across the country are sort of dealing with adaptation and resilience, if at all. And for states that have an adaptation plan, we break down into detail sort of what they're doing to further their goals and objectives. And the third is we follow a model for providing subject matter expertise on a specific subject for different levels of government policymakers. So one of these subjects that we have a toolkit on is the Green Infrastructure Toolkit. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that for the case study project that I'm sharing with you all today. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, some of you may have more experience than others in coastal adaptation. But when it comes to thinking about adaptation on the coast, there's traditionally sort of three responses that policymakers evaluate. So the first in red is thinking about protection. So those will be your hard shoreline armoring methods where people are staying in place and trying to hold water back. In yellow, you'll see accommodation, which is often called something like living with water, where structures may be elevated or flood-proof, so people acknowledge that there's a threat and want to prepare for it without leaving the area where they currently are. The third strategy is called retreat or relocation. It's known by many names, but that's the idea of trying to facilitate voluntary transitions for people and ecosystems away from harmful areas. With adaptation in the coastal sector, as with any sector, whatever your strategies are, it's important to think that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And so you should start with communities and policymakers by bringing all the options to the table and seeing what might work somewhere and what might not work somewhere for all of the different reasons, whether that's funding, political support, community needs. And so one area that's increasingly getting attention, and there's more need for additional resources on that front, is the area of retreat, particularly as some areas are realizing that, you can't always build back after storms, or where there are places encountering new types of flooding, like high tide, nuisance, or sunny day flooding. It's called many different things. People may not be able to stay where they've been for decades or centuries, and so what options are available to them? So that brings us to our first principle, and I'm happy to see that it was the most voted one, about thinking in systems. So Georgetown Climate Center is in the process of putting together a managed retreat toolkit. It'll be released this summer, and it's essentially an online resource for state and local coastal policymakers that will give them different legal and policy tool options that they could think about if in their communities they want to consider or are interested in implementing different managed retreat strategies. And I flag this in terms of thinking about systems because retreat is a really complex subject. Traditionally, people have only thought about, how can we get private development like homes and move those out of harm's way? So maybe they'll use like a voluntary buyout, demolish a home, convert it to open space, and that's the end of the story. But that's only one part of the picture. You have people who live in those homes, you have businesses and lives and livelihoods and cultures in those areas. You also have the ecosystems that are left behind and present a lot of opportunities for providing ecosystem service and other types of benefits for people, and also intrinsic values for natural resources in and of themselves. So with this toolkit, we're seeking to bring comprehensive decision-making resources to policymakers so that way they can prepare better decisions going forward if they're thinking about retreat. And this gets into all of the different subjects on the screen, from thinking about what types of mandatory tools or regulations might be available, to how could you incentivize people to move through financial encouragements, to one concept that's increasingly getting attention from the equitable perspective is thinking about not just getting people out of harm's way, but where are they going to move? Are they moving somewhere that is going to be safer for them, or are they potentially moving to an area that's going to put them in a different type of risk? And this is called a receiving community. In the coastal sector, the thinking about systems approach is also even compounded. So again, just to make sure we all have a similar foundational standpoint. In the coastal sector, there's a lot of overlapping legal jurisdictions and agencies and laws. So in the upland jurisdiction, you're generally going to have local governments having primary jurisdiction over areas through land use and floodplain ordinances. In mid-coastal areas, you're going to have states, and further out shore, you're going to have federal jurisdiction. And all of these two can overlap in different ways. So when you're thinking in systems, with the toolkit, we're not just trying to bring perspectives to look across sectors and stakeholders, but also levels of government and agency players within those governments and statutes. So another component of the toolkit is not just thinking about systems and sort of what are all these different considerations you want to approach if you're considering retreat, but also who's doing this on the ground and how could this help promote peer learning among other jurisdictions that maybe don't want to be the first, or maybe want to see if there's lessons learned from somebody else so they can make sure to avoid those going forward and effectively allocate resources. So the two principles I want to sort of wrap up with are thinking about using best practices of places that have done something well, and how have they mainstreamed it through different legal and policy tools. So we're briefly going to look at a few examples of how we're featuring these in the toolkit. So in California, you all are working out there, and I know some of you are also from California, you may see frequently communities like Del Mar or Pacifica that have been embroiled in controversial battles regarding retreat. So the California Coastal Commission, which is the state's primary coastal regulating entity, is considering putting out regulatory guidance. So it's not mandatory, but it's how local governments with coastal programs should think about putting together their programs when people are coming to them for new development permits. And part of this residential adaptation policy guidance includes asking local governments to think about retreat. And in these communities, even the thought of even thinking about it, even if it doesn't commit you to anything, is politically controversial, particularly for people thinking about the value of their homes, because if there's a threat that maybe their home won't be there in the future, they're worried that that's going to cause the values of their homes to plummet. So this is definitely something to watch nationally, but particularly in California, who's being an exemplar in trying to sort of push the envelope by having communities think about this going forward. In Norfolk, Virginia, the Virginia area, where Norfolk is, Hampton Roads is the area on the East Coast that's facing the greatest risk of sea level rise on that coast. Norfolk, Virginia has one of the most progressive examples of a planning ordinance and plan that supports that in the nation. And so through this plan, Norfolk, Virginia is looking out to a scale of about 100 years, out to 2100, compared to most local governments that maybe are only legally required to look out to 10 or 20 or 30 years to try and align their future land use and zoning decisions with the timescale for climate change. And so through this, they're sort of taking a systems approach. So you can see how a lot of these principles are interweaved by looking at what areas they're going to protect, which you see in red, where there's critical infrastructure that they don't want to move, areas in yellow, where they are thinking about accommodating sea level rise, and areas in green and purple where they're looking at sort of trying to encourage retreat and incentivize new development in higher ground areas. And the last example, which may be of interest to you all working at the community level, Louisiana is the state in the US that's experiencing the fastest rate of sea level rise. With that, the state has partnered with a nonprofit, the Foundation for Louisiana, to engage in a large scale community engagement and planning effort across 6 parishes. That's what Louisiana calls counties. If you didn't know that, I didn't know that before I started this work, to really look at educating communities about the risks that they're facing, so that way they're building local capacity, so that way they can better respond to these impacts in the future. Among the different things that have come out of one project called LA Safe, Louisiana Strategic Adaptations for Future Environments program, which is a mouthful, the state is funding 10 adaptation projects across these 6 parishes that were informed by this community engagement and planning process. It has also produced 7 adaptation strategies or plans, one for each parish and one that looks at things on a regional basis to help try and guide adaptation decisions in the future. And with LA Safe, sort of they tried to align adaptation strategies based on different levels of flood risk and sort of demographic changes in coastal Louisiana. So for example, areas that have lower flood risk are areas where people may be moving in the future to escape more vulnerable coastal areas. And so those are called receiving areas, as we mentioned before on the slide with the different components of the Managed Retreat Toolkit. So how can people think about preparing proactive investments for these areas to minimize social and economic costs and transitions for people? And so the last point I wanted to hit on is, in addition to thinking about these principles in terms of how they affect my job, I think what's more important and what I love about working at the Georgetown Climate Center is that we don't work in an ivory tower vacuum because we are a part of a university, but we really think about how the resources that we create can be informed by and useful for practitioners on the ground. So all of the things that we're thinking about and that are in the Living Guide are really translated into practice for practitioners. For us in particular, because we work in the area of law and policy, how can that influence different types of plans, like in Norfolk, or change law and policy guidance like we saw in California and Louisiana. So with that, I will wrap things up, and I look forward to the rest of today's discussion and would be happy to serve as a resource for anybody going forward.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was incredible. Just love seeing how those principles are coming into play, and as well as the categories of action in your work. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Karen now.
I forgot I was muted. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen. All right. Y'all see this first slide? Okay, thanks everybody for having me to the group. Again, I'm Karen Rogers, And I'm really excited to come and tell you a little bit more about the work that we do with various communities and municipalities in developing various types of resilience solutions. So I'm here representing a group. It's what's called a public-private partnership, which is essentially a partnership between an applied research center at UNC Asheville called NEMAC, the National Environmental Modeling and Analysis Center, of which I'm interim director, as well as our small business spinoff called Fernleaf Interactive. NEMAC and Fernleaf have been working in this field for several years now, and have been members of ASAP for a while, and very excited and love the organization. And so please join if you haven't. Little plug there. So who we are and what we do. So essentially our group, we are a decision support partnership, essentially focusing on increasing community resilience. We provide a resilience framework and facilitation and decision support tools with the communities and partners we work with. We are very focused on capacity building with our clients, and we're all here based in Asheville, North Carolina, up in the mountains. If you've never been here. But the types of work we do is we work with clients to understand what their true climate and non-climate vulnerabilities are, and help them identify and evaluate and prioritize what adaptation and mitigation actions that they could be considering. Ideally, what we're doing is helping them integrate the work that we do with them into their local initiatives. So that's sustainability plans, resilience plans, hazard mitigation plans. Those are probably some of the most common mechanisms that our work gets featured with. But really, we want, after working with partners, we want to be able to leave behind the capability to make sure that this is a living initiative and living document, something that could be continually updated as things progress. And so it's not just another plan on the shelf. Sorry. There we go. And so we have a long breadth and depth of experience of building national tools essentially for local decision support. Some of the feature products that we've worked with on our partners with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation on their coastal exposure mapping tool, that's called CREST. We've been longtime partners with those developing the National Climate Assessment with NOAA and USGCRP. We've partnered with and have partnered for several years with those scientists at drought.gov, as well as some of our longest partnerships and strongest partnerships are with the NOAA Climate Program Office and the development of climate.gov and toolkit.climate.gov. All for really the purposes of building these tools in order to get them into the hands of local decision makers, right? And so being able to understand the user experience and understand the data information that they need to be able to make informed decisions off of various climate vulnerability and risk assessments. And so here's an example of some of the communities we've worked with over the years. I'm going to talk a little bit about Asheville today, but we've worked across mostly the Southeast, from Asheville through the Triangle region. We helped with the Triangle Regional Resilience Assessment down to New Bern, North Carolina. We just finished working with Charleston, South Carolina this year, and have partnered with cities in Tallahassee, West Palm Beach, and various other southern Florida communities in their resilience assessments. And so, the idea is really to be able to develop tools and data and information for local decision making. Again, so this is kind of a flagship product that we use and a lot in the work that we do, and this is in partnership with NOAA. We co-lead the toolkit, the Climate Resilience Toolkit. Two main products from there are the Steps to Resilience, which is a process, a framework for assessing your vulnerability and risks and preparing for resilience, as well as the Climate Explorer, which is an interactive tool that we've built that features both historic and projected information featured both in the National Climate Assessment and elsewhere, that is searchable by your state and city and zip code. So with the Living Guide to Principles, it was hard to choose because there are so many really relevant components in here that come into our work. But for me, the 4 that really popped up again, which I think came up in our polls, for using the best science and knowledge and projections about future conditions, on fully understanding what your local community may be facing, thinking in systems, of course, and collaboration, I think are some of the top 4. I could probably have picked 10 or 20. But again, so the steps to resilience is basically is the framework of the work we do. It is featured on the Climate Resilience Toolkit, but from end to end, it's a 5-step assessment process, from exploring threats to assessing vulnerability and risks, investigating and identifying your options, prioritizing and planning and comparing those options and understanding what is really available to you, as well as then finally taking action. It provides a transparent and defensible priorities by the end. And again, it's all about increasing the capacity for mostly we're working with municipal and jurisdictional staff to be able to kind of have a plan to work together. And I'll talk a little bit more about that kind of collaboration part here. So again, I'm going to just frame these principles in the work that we did with the city of Asheville. It's probably our longest running project since 2016. We initiated the climate resilience assessment with them back then. It was formally adopted in 2018 into our local comprehensive plan. But really, it's all about understanding spatially, understanding where in the city we are most vulnerable and at risk to certain climate threats, and the ones that we are facing here in the mountains of North Carolina, and then identifying and targeting what we could do about those particular areas. And so, so we're talking assets and populations and various items of value that the city and our partners and our neighborhoods and our nonprofits and everything that they're interested in. It's about kind of protecting and understanding where we're most vulnerable and at risk. The project ended with a communications outreach effort to various neighborhoods, a personal action guide, essentially what citizens of Asheville could do. But it's one of our, just one of our projects. It's probably the most active one since we all still live here and able to kind of participate locally. So using the best science and knowledge, right? So the ASAP principle really is kind of about, ensuring your adaptation decisions are grounded in the best science that's out there. And really, this is an underpinning of the work that we do. It's all about providing the foundation and the scene setting for when you're starting to understand your resilience, to understand what you may be facing. And there are a handful of products out there in science. We are go-to, products and efforts out there, the National Climate Assessment, as well as the Climate Explorer, to basically, these tools allow us to explain to various communities essentially what they're facing. And so, for example, for Asheville, North Carolina, the things that we will be facing current and in the future, are increased flooding, nuisance flooding, as Katie was talking about. Landslides are a factor here due to the stronger and more frequent heavy precipitation events, an increased risk of water shortage and wildfire. That's a big deal. Due to increasing the severity of drought. Supply chain interruptions, a big deal for us here. We can be isolated pretty quickly with some of the highways coming into our region, and then increasing temperature variability that can really lead to some more extreme heat events, and that has some real consequences for some of our vulnerable populations. And so, having a foundation of good science and understanding really, I think, it gives a good footing for working with cities to understand what they might be facing. And so this ties into also using projections about the future. And so, for us, you know, future is uncertain, but using the best available projections about the future really can help us indicate what may be possible. You know, so if you're even talking about scenario planning, that kind of thing, the idea is to understand what we may be facing, and both with climate but also non-climate threats. We have a real issue here in Nashville with development and increased population. We are a tourist and retirement destination for a lot of people in the Southeast. So that added pressure on top of the climate threats is a real concern and something that needs to be considered while we're planning for these things. And here I just have an example of like what I went into the Climate Explorer to understand, to show you here, you know, what projections are for Asheville. And it's essentially showing days with more than 3 inches of precipitation. And how that could impact flooding. Flooding's a big deal here. We have a river going through our town there. We are our terrain and our topography is very, you know, mountainous, and that has some real consequences and real impact for things like food locations, food access and SNAP access, and for where certain populations actually go to get their food. There are a handful of places in town that are really at risk if we are not, you know, if we're to see the future of increased precipitation that we're expecting. So this is the type of assessment, you know, we did for Asheville. We've done, you know, we're looking at wildfire, drought, landslides, flooding, all that kind of thing. But the idea is to target and understand where, if we think, you know, with what's projected, where these increased risks are going to happen. Thinking in systems, again, for us here, it kind of circles back into the last steps of the steps to resilience, which is about, you know, understanding and identifying your options, but also prioritizing and understanding how the solutions and actions that you are coming up with are actually meeting certain criteria, and understanding how that they intersect one another, where co-benefits may occur with some of the benefits or some of the solutions you may derive. So, and it's not only about, you know, across systems, but it's about cross departments and how we could find solutions that mean something to maybe stormwater as well as transportation. You know, there's these kind of cross-sectional system thinking when you are thinking, you know, about creating and developing new innovative ideas and solutions to address some of these issues.
Hey, Karen, I think we're going to wrap up here in the next minute if that's all right. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just chatty. Okay, so collaboration, like I said, really important. I've got 2 more slides. You know, it's all about cross-departmental work, and we do that a lot by using workshops, working with various departments, but also we've developed an application called Accel Adapt, which is a product that most cities can use cross-departmental to access the assessment work that we do. It's updated regularly, it's easily accessible, and it's spatial. And so that's one way of collaboration that we like to encourage to use. So again, really quick, broad reflection looking back at this. There's so many adaptations that or so many principles that are really, really important. But for us, it's all about kind of looking to 2 things. How can you help others invest their resources so they are best positioned to avoid loss? And how can you help others build capacity? It's really just what it comes down to. Keep those in mind, and I think we're all suited well for adaptation.
Thank you so much, Karen. No, that was wonderful. I mean, there's so much that you do and that we all do, and it is definitely hard to boil it down to 10 minutes.
It is. It's hard.
Thank you so much to both Karen and Katie for those really fabulous presentations. Just, I think, an incredibly strong illustration of how to do adaptation work well. And I think we are going to take 1 or 2 questions really briefly before we move into our breakout. I did see one question for Karen in the chat, which is about what flood projections you all are using. Do you see that one and want to take it?
Let me see. Yeah, so that's a good question. I will have to go back and defer to but from what I remember, we basically look at various, you know, the 100-year, 500-year floodplain for understanding and conceptualizing where projected, you know, potential flood events could be. There's a lot more specifics to that. They get a lot more technical that I'd be happy to give you offline, but it can get really complicated really fast with flooding. But
okay, yeah, maybe I'll follow up with you on that.
Yes, please do.
Technical aspects of that.
Yeah.
Well, this is fun, getting more people adding to the conversation. To keep with time, so this is going to be kind of different. We're just going to be talking, getting a chance to share the questions that we came up with in our pre-work, and then addressing how to incorporate those questions and any barriers into our work or career in general. So I'm going to start by asking for one note taker. Oh, Kaylee, one thing that I did wonder is, should I share my notes in the chat since it's a new group? That's probably...
Yeah, I can handle that for you if you want to keep framing.
Sure. So Kaylee is going to share, it's the same thing that you guys saw before, but with each facilitator, we're breaking up just separate notes to type in, all for recording purposes. So I'll start by asking one person to be a note taker. Your only role is to basically record the questions that we shared to the group of what we came up with in our pre-work. So, and it involves just typing it at the bottom of the document or wherever is comfortable for you, for what Kaylee put in the chat. So does anybody want to volunteer for that role?
I can do it.
Thanks, Dominique.
You're welcome.
Okay, so the first part of this is just going to be 5 minutes or less of, it says 1 to 2 in the instructions, but I think for time purposes, we'll keep it to one question that we came up with in our pre-work. And then you can say what principle it matches. So if anyone wants to start, just going around and kind of popcorning questions.
I had one that I was thinking about. Based on the principle, use best available science and knowledge. And then I kind of felt that was very relating to use existing best practices. So I was just kind of thinking of both of them, but the question I came up with was just have I asked the experts and who I consider to be the best, or at least not even just the best, but somebody who specializes or in whatever topic that I'm trying to do the best on. It's just something I've thought about doing my sustainability policy, and for each section of it, we were able to ask a different person about the best, what they thought about it.
For sure. And then Dominique, I just want to ask you, you got the document open, okay, right? And for typing in the questions.
Yeah, do you want me to put it on that Google Doc that everyone's working in?
Yeah, that's, I think, what Rachel was hoping for. Just as the reason we're typing all these in is, again, for data to Rachel to then take back. And later at the end, we'll talk about questions that all of us most resonated with. So does anybody want to go next for a question that they had in their pre-work?
Yeah, I can go. I was looking at the principle related to diversity and inclusion, and something that I've been asking myself in regard to my project over the past couple months is, how can I help facilitate reciprocal relationships between vulnerable community members and local government? That's something the town of Truckee is actively trying to pursue, and it's definitely been difficult. But Emma, I really related to your comment. Have I asked the experts? And in this case, I would say the experts in our community are community-based organizations and those that interact and interface with these communities daily. So I've been trying to reach out to them and connect with them.
For my work, I focused on the recognized context question, and how can I ensure relevant context for the work I'm doing around electric vehicle action plan, because I'm drafting a plan and I'm including some stuff in there around like ensuring that people from a variety of income backgrounds can find this accessible, but also promoting public transportation and other forms of electric mobility as well. But I think like this is something that could fall pretty tone deaf and exacerbate existing inequalities if not addressed. So that was a question that I had.
Awesome. Does somebody want to go next?
I'll go next. So part of my project is a lot of outreach on the climate action plan and then also on zero waste issues. So when I'm creating some content that's going to be either like a big email that's going to go out or something on the website or a social media post, I'll run through a lot of questions in my head. So I'll just kind of like fire them off. They're not as deep questions, but like, am I avoiding the use of technical jargon? Is this going to make the material engaging for people? Is the information going to be accessible to everyone? Am I using as many channels as possible to get the information out there? And the principle is mainstream, so I'm just trying to make this information about climate action and about zero waste as widespread in the community as possible.
Great. Just to keep with time, I wish I could talk more about these questions, but we'll get into that after everybody goes. But does somebody have another question? I can share mine. Mine goes with the principle of recognizing and activating leadership. So with the Children and Youth Task Force, a question I have been asking and in recent feedback is what voices are missing at the table of influence that aren't typically present or represented, and talking specifically about like our youth reps on a task force, since they're the community that's going to be the receiver of the work that's being done. Anybody else that hasn't gone to finish up our share out? Okay, I'm not sure if, I think Gianelli and Mackenzie, and I don't know if Sarah and Kaylee wanted to share any, but.
Where are you right now? I had to take a call earlier.
We're still doing a share out since our group is a little larger, but if we want to jump to the next section for the sake of time, we can do that as well.
Oh, share out of like the questions that we made, or?
Yeah, it's just the first 5 minutes, even though it's been maybe a little bit over.
Let's see. Yeah, I think, where are my questions? Do you want me to just read one of them out or two of them out?
Just one is good.
Okay. I think for the achieve just and equitable outcomes, one is just thinking about who benefits from those outcomes that you have, your projects.
Yeah, definitely something I think about a lot too. Kaylee, I wanted to ask you, so for this next section, did Rachel just say to do one person? Okay, yeah. So.
And just so you know, I'm gonna send a reminder to all the other breakout groups that we got about 5 minutes or so. So I think one run through and then doing that wrap up activity will be perfect.
Okay. So if nobody else wants to share a question that they came with to the session, we can move on to our next part, and that's I'm going to ask one of you to volunteer, but we'll just look in the instructions. I just want you guys to look at the questions that are highlighted. So one person is basically going to present a task, project, or idea that they're trying to improve, and then what principle they want to integrate into that task, project, or idea, and a checklist question that applies to that. And then they can also reflect on an idea you have for addressing the checklist question and some barriers. So that should take a total of 3 minutes, just sharing those answers out. And then the group is just going to get a chance to respond. Only a couple people to some insight and wisdom that can mitigate those barriers. So does one person want to volunteer? I would say I would go, but I don't want to be the only person talking.
And Evelyn, I've been just eavesdropping on your crew. You're doing an awesome job. And you guys have talked about a lot of this already. So I would maybe just recommend focusing in on a barrier that's coming up for someone. Because I feel like a lot of folks have shared context already.
Cool. Does anyone have a specific barrier they'd like to talk about and share with the group?
I can go. So yeah, I'm in the city of Albany, which is a city of like 20,000 people. And something that's come up before is that there's not necessarily like good baseline information on certain, like I had specifically been trying to look into like understanding on a more micro scale where different like areas of the city with different level income, as well as also language, differences in language and people who don't speak English. And I feel like because so yeah, Albany, yeah, it's 20,000. So in part due to that, it's hard to identify, like get a baseline understanding when you're trying to like make plans around that have like goals around equity when there's like not that baseline. So that's something that I've run into a couple times in my work. Yeah, and like I've been using information from like Cal EnviroScreen and census data and stuff like that. But I've still found it hard to find some of that information.
Definitely. Does anybody have any tricks or tools, expertise that they would like to share?
Yeah, Bianca, I've run into a really similar issue, and kind of what I was talking about earlier. One approach that I've used is going to community-based organizations, because often, you know, they're the folks interfacing with those populations on a regular basis. So if you have any keystone organizations that serve the community, perhaps that provide social services or you know, lead community gatherings or engage in food distribution or something like that, they might have data and information for you that you could use.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I had thought about CBOs before, but I hadn't really thought about, like we do have within the city, like organizations that provide meals to people. And that's not something I'd ever thought about, so thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think in response to that barrier, they did just, I think it was Kaylee, is that you? Yeah, she typed in that we have to wrap it up. So I think for that barrier, if anybody wants to message Bianca too afterwards, that would be awesome. But our wrap up exercise is actually just to reflect on the questions that we all shared out, and see what we want to take away. So looking at what questions that we shared out most aligned with us and what we are looking to take away and use in our work moving forward. So we all have access to the Google document, so we can, Dominique did an awesome job at typing those out. Does anybody want to share out what, I don't know, they might be using in their work moving forward that we shared out? I think for me, I really liked Erin's question of how can I help facilitate reciprocal relationships between vulnerable communities and local government. That's something that I have, especially with like minimal supervision, have struggled with a lot this year, and creating my own relationships and sustaining them in a way that's meaningful and doesn't seem superficial, like I'm trying to use it as the benefit of my work, but I'm actually genuinely interested in creating that relationship. So me personally, I am definitely gonna use that question in my work moving forward.
I know I've discussed a lot lately, is the information accessible to all? Because I feel like as much as I try to work on it, I feel like I always miss like one group that I didn't completely think of when planning stuff like this, or how to get our information out. So it's just something I kind of want to like get better at and make sure I like have that on my mind.
I liked the question that Emma had. Have I asked the experts or asked the specialists on what I'm working on? Kind of like what Evelyn said, working independently and without much supervision, you can get kind of in your own little hole working on your project and easily get stuck. But just to take a step back and rely on your network, even other CivicSpark fellows, but just to help and get some feedback on your work or support or more information.
Yeah, I think even just talking to people that are working on the same things is super helpful. I've run into several roadblocks with my projects, and even though I didn't have any experts accessible, honestly, just reaching out to CivicSpark fellows who are working on similar things was super helpful, and definitely gave me a boost of energy, honestly, just knowing that other people are working on the same things, and sometimes even just standing in solidarity with people who also don't know what to do is still helpful.
Hi everyone, welcome back, and thanks for joining for the last 10 seconds of the lobby breakout group. I'm sure it was nice to hear those final reflections. So as always, in a 1.5 hour workshop, it's just so hard to cover it all. And we're always really ambitious with the agenda. So I hope that you found some opportunity in your breakouts to really talk about what was on folks' minds, even if we didn't get to every element of every single activity. I want to just say thank you one more time to our ASAP member speakers, Karen and Katie, and we'll be sharing out their email addresses, if that's all right with the two of you, now that I put you on the spot. It's super awkward to say no. So folks can follow up with them with questions. And when we do that follow-up, we're also going to be sending our 3 wrap-up questions that we were going to discuss at the end of our time together, and ask folks to consider just writing in what you're thinking on those. And that's how has what you learned today changed your thinking about what constitutes principled adaptation practice? What questions still remain for you? And how will what you learned influence your career plan or career vision? Again, thank you so much for being here. Kaylee is going to send right now in the chat our feedback evaluation form for the workshop. So if you could open that up, that would be wonderful. And we'll also send it in the follow-up email. With that, I will turn it back over to Kaylee to officially close us out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you to Katie and Karen. And a huge thank you to our fellows who facilitated the breakout groups. Really appreciate all of you. Do a Zoom clap. And thank you everyone who participated. I think this is a really great way to spend our Thursday. I hope this generated more thoughts that you all can continue to connect on in the last 2 months or so of your service. And like Rachel said, we'll be following up with some more information for all of you. And then one last reminder for Climate Change Adaptation Network Fellows, we will be having our final network call in June. We'll be sending out more information, but we're going to be hearing about transformational resilience from Emily Wasley. So we're really excited to have her as our next speaker for our calls. And with that, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Thursday and enjoy your weekends. Take care, everyone.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.